Hi, this is Scott from Resilient Ecology Systems and Design, and today we're going to be continuing on with our list of 7 through 12 of the 12 permaculture principles. And starting with number 7, permaculture likes to talk about designing from patterns to details. A lot of times, we traditionally approach landscaping the opposite way. We say, oh, I really want an apple tree right here, or I really want, a vine right here. But, permaculture kind of turns that on its head and it says, no, first we need to look at the patterns that we're trying to establish here, the ways, because it's really the patterns that are catching and storing energy and directing the energy that's already in the system to the best, possible use that we can think of at that moment. It's interesting when I took my PDC in New Mexico just over a year ago. Our teacher just said, don't think about specific plans. I don't want to hear about specific plans for, the first few days of the class. Just start thinking about, the patterns that you're seeing. Start thinking about, the way that you're going to integrate these things. And then afterwards, you can start to look at the details. So, in that same way, this seventh principle talks about integrating or going from patterns first, and then, slowly starting to flesh out the details once we figure out the pattern. The eighth permaculture principle is integrate rather than segregate. So, a lot of the way that we like to think of things and that we've gotten in the habit of thinking of things is we like to segregate things by their parts. We like to, disassemble things, in many different areas of life and start to look at, each thing by its part. So you may have a problem with your car and you may say, oh, is it the engine, the alternator, all of these things. And it helps a little bit for being able to look at it that way when we're diagnosing a part. But at the same time, if you just had an engine, an alternator, and all of these things together in a box, you don't have a car there because they're not integrated. We may view things in a segregated way, but we need to start looking at them, especially with our landscapes, in an integrated way. So the placement of something may affect the performance of something that's next to it. For instance, when we put our compost piles inside of a chicken coop, we get a lot of beneficial effects to the chickens who are able to keep the insects down in the compost pile, who are able to actually turn the compost by scratching it. Chickens love to just scratch at the ground. And we end up with compost quicker, we end up with lower insect populations, and we end up feeding our chickens. So all of those things start to look at just, the simple relationship of a compost pile and chickens in an integrated rather than segregated way. The ninth permaculture principle is small and slow solutions. So while a lot of us can be really excited about practicing permaculture, about starting to do things with a permaculture design, we need to look at the way that we're going to implement the solutions, and we need to realize that nature does things over the span of hundreds and hundreds of years. And while we don't need to do it over hundreds and hundreds of years, we should try and tend towards a little bit of the smaller, slower solutions rather than just radically changing everything at once. Because another thing with the small and slow solutions is we're able to see feedback from the system a lot quicker. A lot of times the smaller and slower solutions are quite a bit cheaper also. So we end up with the advantage of being able to get a better established system and being able to take the feedback that the environment's providing us while at the same time saving money, which is always a plus. One example of this could be planting a windbreak from treed seeds, rather than buying like fully developed trees. So this is going to do a few things. First, if you start from seed, you're saving lots and lots of money. You can buy thousands of seeds for under $100. If you buy fully formed, like let's even just say 4 or 6 foot trees, you're spending quite a bit more money. But also you get to, as those trees grow and develop from the seeds, you start to see how the environment's changing. You can make some minor adjustments, and those trees are actually going to be better established because they grew in that area. So they're going to have better tap roots. They're going to be able to access the nutrients better in that area, and they're going to be locally adapted. So that's an advantage of small and slow solutions. Permaculture principle number 10 is cultivate diversity. Um, Diversity in and of itself is a good thing, but in permaculture, we look at, the diversity of the plants as long as they can have interactions between them. Uh, Actually, there are many ways in which we can have different plants play off of each other's strengths and reinforce, and then just continuously cycle nutrients and energy flows in many ways, so that the system becomes richer and richer. Something interesting that Peter Bain brings up in his permaculture handbook is that there are 100,000 plants that humans have used for food, for fiber, for material, for building, for all of these things, and yet only 20 plants right now make up about 90% of the human diet. 20 plant species. So, that's really kind of alarming when you look at, that small proportion of plants. What if a, if a good number of those plants end up being susceptible to some kind of disease or some kind of plague that wipes out the corn or that wipes out the soybean? Large tracts of the human population are going to be in trouble if that happens. In permaculture, we want to cultivate diversity because it mitigates our risk of failure. Uh, in any one area, we have all of these fallbacks, all of these plants with many different uses that we're cultivating, so that if anything happens to one, it's really not that big of a deal to us because we're not reliant on that one species. Also, the many different diverse plant sets can create more opportunities and more niches and more different areas where we can have edge in the system, which is the next area, which is the 11th permaculture principle, which is mind the edges, or mind the margins and look for edges. So we need to be looking a lot of times on the edge is like when you have two different biomes is the way that we think of it. So you have maybe a pond and then maybe a forest, and then that edge is going to be that little area of wetlands where there's forest overshadowing the pond, and that's where you end up with a lot of different species and a lot of productivity. That's where you end up with a lot of amphibians who live on the edge. That's where you're going to end up with a lot of both beneficial all different types of insects and beneficial plants like cattails. So we need to be looking at the edge. We need to be conscious of edge effects when we're doing our design. And, sometimes designing a system to have more of an edge is a good thing rather than to just simply make everything in a bunch of square blocks. If we make shapes that are more curving and maybe have fingers in them, we end up increasing the amount of edge and therefore increasing the amount of the most productive part of our system, where we have two different systems interacting. And the edges tend to also have higher levels of diversity. So playing into our last permaculture principle. And finally, going into the 12th permaculture principle, which is cultivate a vision and respond to change. So, we're lucky as humans that we get to develop a vision for how we see things in the future. And sometimes that can get us into a little bit of trouble when we don't stop to look at what it is that we've actually changed and respond to that. So this 12th permaculture principle, I think, really goes into the way that humans are meant to interact with our environment, which is to make those little incremental changes and to see how the system responds, and to use that information that we're getting to inform our next decision. And through that process, just having a vision of where it is that we want to go. So, for instance, for the property that I'm going to be talking about in a lot of the next videos for developing, I have a vision to a general vision to develop it as a permaculture property, a 10-acre, slightly degraded property in northern Arizona, to degrade it or to develop it using permaculture principles to be a productive and functioning landscape. And it's good if we keep those visions somewhat general rather than going into saying, oh, I want to have an apple orchard and a pear orchard, or do all of these specific things, because as I take those small incremental steps with the property up in northern Arizona, we're going to be able to see what's changing and to be able to respond to those changes and try and steer all of our individual decisions that we make in order to reach that vision that we have for the property. I appreciate your time today, and I'm going to be covering more of the practical side of permaculture in a lot of the days coming up. But it is important to look at a lot of the philosophical and theoretical backgrounds in order to understand where permaculture is coming from and why it's a different type of design system. And now that we've gone over permaculture ethics and the permaculture design principles, we can start to look at how to apply those principles in real life to certain design decisions. And I'll leave us with one thought today. Something that is interesting about permaculture is that the fundamental currency in permaculture, the fundamental resource really is knowledge. And our systems, our landscapes don't have a capped yield. So as we develop our knowledge about permaculture, as we start to integrate more ideas, we can always be increasing our yield, our productivity for ourselves, for the earth, for all sorts of social situations. So, it's a good thing to be continuously learning about permaculture to be able to put into practice a lot of the different designs and methods that we have in permaculture into a functioning whole system. So, again, this was Scott with Resilient Ecology Systems and Design, and I hope you have a great day.